Hi, Sarah here to share my thoughts on Alien Earth Episode 4. Again, another great episode. Noah Hawley and his team, they're just knocking it out of the park. I'm loving this show. We start out where we left off at the end of episode 3, where Wendy was passed out on the floor from the noises from the xenomorphs she was hearing. So now they've moved her into the lab and they have her hearing turned off and they're doing some tests and they're trying to figure out like what happened, like why is she hearing it? What's going on? Are they communicating with her? Is she communicating with them? What's going on? Slowly, they bring her hearing back online. Arthur has this cool little hearing test device thing with these like little clicky sliders on it that I think is really cool. I love the analogness of everything in the show. Is great. So she kind of describes to them what happens, and Cavalier, of course, is very interested because he wants to be able to communicate with these aliens. So they slowly bring her hearing back online and they bring it up to a level where she can hear the aliens again. And Cavalier has her repeat the sounds that she was hearing. It's really kind of a creepy, cool scene. Her brother Joe, of course, we see now is okay, and he's with her when they're doing all of this stuff. And he's very protective of her, but Wendy's like, I can speak for myself. You don't have to protect me as big brother. If anything, I'm the one protecting you now. Anyway, so Wendy, they go through the tests and then everyone kind of leaves the room except for Cavalier and Adam, his second hand guy. And they have a discussion of like, what does this mean if she can communicate with them? You know, is she communicating with them, or is she just hearing what they're communicating with each other? And well, now they know that Wendy can hear them or communicate with them or whatever. So what does that mean? So that's kind of an interesting way to leave it. Then we get Wendy and Joe in her bedroom. So she's kind of showing him around the things in her room, and they get into this very conversation about like, well, why didn't you see me when I was sick? And it was and he just said, I was in a war, I was in the other side of the earth. If there was a way that I could have come and seen you, I would have done it. And that seems to really alleviate something in her mind, because at the beginning of that scene she kind of feels that Joe is mad at her because her death was faked and all of that he's mad. But Joe's like, no, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at what Prodigy is doing. I'm not liking this. So then we get to, they go to the, speaking of labs, they go to the other research lab, and this time they have a sheep in a glass room and they set the octo-eye creature on it, which is really this gross and great scene where the little octo-eye attacks the sheep, rips its eyeball out. It's very gross and disgusting. But at the end, you realize that this octo-eye creature is highly intelligent, as Kirsch puts it. And so it basically popped out the sheep's eye and basically replaced made its eyes look like one sheep eye, and it's just staring at Kirsch. And then Cavalier gets its attention and basically kind of tells it like, I'm the one that you need to pay attention to. And that was kind of gross and gruesome and interesting. And I really like the octo-eye creatures, just so cool. Anyway, um, then we get to kind of what really is a big part of this episode is Morrow and Slightly having a conversation, and just the expert way that Morrow just manipulates Slightly into doing what he wants. And we also find out that Kirsch has discovered this going on. At this point, he hasn't said anything. We'll get into a little more of that later. Um, but Kirsch is aware of this Slightly Morrow thing happening, and Morrow manipulates Slightly into telling him what his real name is, which immediately I was like, oh, now that he knows his real name, he's going to go after his family. And sure enough, later on, Slightly and Morrow touch base again because he wants Slightly to steal an egg, and Slightly attempts to do that, isn't successful, goes back to Morrow and says basically, look, I can't do this, I'm not going to do it. And Morrow basically tells him, look, I've got your mom sitting here with me, and your brothers are going to be coming home from school or whatever later. And so Morrow basically is like holding his mother hostage and is basically going to kill her if he doesn't do what he wants to do. And he's like, well, I can't get an egg out. Well, Morrow's like, what you're going to do is you're going to get a human in the room with the egg, and he describes the whole face hugger process and all of that. And once you get a human implanted, impregnated with the xenomorph, then you're going to call me to come get that person. And that's how we get that specimen out. And meanwhile, Kirsch is watching, listening in to this whole conversation. So I'm very curious what Kirsch is going to do. Because it's like, is Kirsch going to stop this from happening? Is Kirsch wanting to let the experiment sort of play out? Is he willing to let Slightly kind of do the dirty work of getting someone implanted, impregnated, whatever you want to call it, with a xenomorph? And this is the way that he can do it. Have Slightly get the person impregnated, and then, stop Morrow from being able to do anything. But we have this human now, and we can see how this growth, develop, life cycle thing happens. So is Kirsch going to do more of like the cold scientist kind of route and actually go along with this without having to be the person or the being or whatever directly involved in sacrificing a human life for this research? Or is he just going to cut it off altogether? So I'm interested to see like what Kirsch's plan is, since he knows about Morrow and Slightly's relationship or manipulation that's going on. So that's going to be really interesting to see. We also see some more cracks with like Arthur and Dame Sylvia kind of having, going off off in the bushes kind of on the island to kind of talk about, Arthur has some real concerns about, he feels like maybe things are going off the rails, and what happens if things go really bad, and maybe we need to start thinking about what the consequences are going to be if this all goes sideways. And she very much is a pro Cavalier. He's on the cutting edge. He's pushing the limits, but we wouldn't be as far as we are if he hadn't. Anyway, and while they're finishing up that conversation, Nibs comes in with an announcement. Hey, I'm pregnant, everybody. And obviously Nibs has like not a, aside from the octo eye attack causing her PTSD, I think there's some other issues going on with her consciousness adjusting to this artificial body, because Arthur basically says, look, there's no way you can be pregnant. You're a machine. And she's like, I'm not a machine. I'm a human. And I mean, clearly she's, lost it. Her psyche is broken to a degree. So anyway, Sylvia takes her to her office. They have a conversation. She tries to get her to see the reality of like, basically like a man and a woman have to come together for pregnancy to happen. And Nib's answer to that is like, well, with Jesus, that isn't what had to happen. And she does some other things, like she tries to show her a diagram of her body to show that she couldn't, she doesn't have like a womb or whatever to be pregnant. And she just knocks the book out of her hand, and she tries to get her to talk about what happened at the crash site. She's like, I'm not going to talk about it. And she's kind of petting and talking to this sort of stuffed bird toy. I think it looks sort of like a stork. Anyway, Sylvia kind of pushes her, and she jumps over the table and like attacks Sylvia. And she's like, oh my God. She's like totally shaking, but she pulls it together. She says, let's have some tea. And, meanwhile, she goes over to make tea, presses the panic button. The security comes in, basically says, send her to her room, lock her down, level 3. I'm curious what a level 3 thing is. And it's just, well, the bigger thing too of like, we're seeing like, how are these kids reacting to being in these new bodies? And obviously Nibs is not handling it. And so we'll have to see what a level 3 event exactly is, and if any of the other kids start to develop these sort of psychological problems, mental health issues, or is it just with Nibs, it's just going wrong because of the attack, or maybe just, what they had to start with what her psychology was at the time they transferred her. It's just breaking down or not working. So I'm really curious how that's going to work and if we're going to see any of that in the other kids, or is it just going to be her? Because each kid kind of has their own thing. I mean, Wendy seems the most rock solid psychologically of them all. She seems to be the one that's the most together. Curly is very wants to be the special one, so she's really kissing up to Cavalier and trying to become the favorite. Um, Slightly is looking for friends. They all kind of have a thing. Wendy seems the most stable of the bunch. We'll see if that continues to be true. Um, but speaking of Wendy, we kind of get to Joe, and Joe has a meeting with Adam, and Adam basically tells him, yeah, you're going to work for us now, and you have to, and any questions we ask you about Wendy or any of the group, you have to answer. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, okay, if you're not going to want to do that, then you never get to see Wendy again, and we're going to bill you because they replaced one of his lungs. As we saw in the previous episode. So now they're going to make him pay for the artificial lung, and basically kind of like he's not going to have a life and he's never going to see Wendy again. So he agrees to stay on the island and do what they request. And they do bring in his squad or unit that he was with, that we saw at the crash site. So they are now on the island with him. So that's kind of a nice little thing they did for him. Then Wendy and Cavalier meet again. And that's a real interesting conversation because Cavalier kind of brings up the thing of like, well, your brother didn't even see you when you were sick. And she heard from her brother directly that he tried everything he could to see her and couldn't. So it'll be interesting, like, how does Wendy, like, take those two things? Does she, is she more on Cavalier's side? Is she more on what her brother said side? It'll be interesting to see kind of how that resolves itself, or if Wendy starts developing some mistrust in Cavalier on some level because of this, because he basically told her the opposite of what her own brother's own words said. There's also another Peter Pan reference where just killing the xenomorph was like killing the like Hook, or like not Hook, but killing the crocodile in Peter Pan, and then hearing the tick-tock of the clock afterwards. That's kind of what Wendy has with killing the xenomorph. Now she can hear them. That's real interesting. Again, just a little side note, Toodles changes his name to Isaac because he wants to be taken seriously as a scientist, so he picks Isaac as in Isaac Newton because he wants to be taken seriously as like a man, as a real scientist. That's about all we get for him on that. And Joe dealing with that, like, he basically has to live out the rest of his life on this island, that Wendy is the property of Prodigy, and she's not going to be able to go home. Also in his meeting with Adam, they kind of bring up a question where Joe's kind of like, did you really transfer consciousness? Is it her? And they're like, well, the first question is kind of a practical answer that, yeah, they were able to, whatever your memories are, energy in your brain or whatever it is, they were able to put it into an artificial body. Now, is that really her? That's more of kind of a deeper, almost like spiritual question of, is that really her, or is it just a copy of her? It gets into, when is a machine no longer a machine? When is, a sentient being a person or not? Or what, we're kind of toying a little bit with those kind of ideas, which I liked. And then, of course, the end scene where Wendy goes to the lab. They have Joe's lung in a tank with a baby xenomorph in it. And of course, she's there and she kind of is singing to it and sort of making, doing their voices and things a little bit. And kind of singing, and so it bursts out of the lung, actually bursts out of the tank, and like is up on a table, and it kind of coils around like a snake, and is sort of looking at Wendy, and Wendy kind of is sort of watching it and like looking at it, and she ends up reaching out and petting the Xeno, the baby Xeno. So you're like, is she like going to be sort of like a queen to these new xenomorphs? Is her ability to speak their language or whatever making them think that she's like their queen or their mom or whatever? And so it'll be interesting to see if that's the direction they go with it or what happens. I'm curious, like Wendy's relationship with the xenomorphs. I'm curious to see how that's going to develop. I think that's going to be really cool. Anyway, and of course, as usual, they end on a metal song. This time it is Ocean Size by Jane's Addiction. As always, I appreciate the metal song at the end. Anyway, that's all of my thoughts for now. I'll see you guys again next week.